Afternoon. Oh, thank you. Good afternoon. So this session is going to focus on community-based participatory research collaborative in terms of really focusing on best practices, and that's important. And I think this is going to help us because some of the earlier speakers began to focus on research, theoretical conceptual frameworks, and helping us move this work forward in terms of paradigm shift. But a very, very important focus of that work that needs to be front and center is how this happens on the ground level, right? So how do you begin to kind of engage some of these relationships and work on these relationships within a context of communities? How does this work actually happen? So we have a wonderful panel that's going to begin to help us to think about some of this work. So each person, how we're going to frame this is each person's going to briefly introduce themselves in terms of some of the work that they do. And then from there, we're going to open it up to some questions. So I'm going to pose some questions, and then different folks will respond to them. So why don't we have folks introduce themselves briefly.
Hi, I'm Mary Sylla. I'm the founder and the director of policy advocacy and research for the Center for Health Justice, which focuses on HIV among prisoner populations and people coming out of jails and prisons. And I'm really very happy to be here. I hope that my son in the back has not distracted people too much. But I'm following in Naina Harawa's proud footsteps of when you have to bring the baby, you bring the baby in order to be at the place you want to be. So thanks for your indulgence. I have been working with researchers on HIV projects for probably about the entire, oh, is the microphone not on? Oh, I'm not talking into it, okay. For probably about the entire 10 or 12 years that the organization has been going on, and it's a wonderful way to get projects funded, to get programs funded, and then to come out at the end with evaluations of those projects. Right now we're focused relevant to this group on HIV among African American men who identify bisexual activity who are coming out of jails and prisons through a project that has been funded for a while but really is just getting up and running. We call it the Health Justice Mile Project, Men in Life Environments, which is an adaptation of the MAILS project that, that Naina and John Williams have been working on. But what collaborating with researchers, you know, it provides a wonderful opportunity for community-based organizations to make sure that their programs are being seriously evaluated and hopefully to be shown effective. And it gives us an opportunity to fund the projects that we think are worthwhile in funding. So that's sort of why I am here. And then I will say that the one thing that I think that we've done sort of by happenstance that has really improved our ability to work with researchers is to have someone like me. I'm focused on grant writing, policy, advocacy, research, and I also happen to have an M.P.H, which really helps me to be a liaison with the researchers. I think that there's sometimes, if an organization is comprised completely of people who are working on the programs and are funded on the programs, it's hard to take the time out to write the grants with the researchers to make sure that you're getting funded what you as a community-based organization wants to get funded. So I serve as sort of a bridge between the researchers and the organization, and I think that's a strength that we've, like I say, by happenstance sort of developed.
Good afternoon. My name is Tony Wafford. I work with the National Action Network. I've been working on the area of HIV and AIDS probably for the, can you hear me? For the last probably 8 or 9 years. What we do basically is try to have conversations where most folk won't have them. What we try to do is actually reach down and talk to folk that most folk don't talk to. What we also try to do is have honest and difficult conversations. I've been fortunate to work with a lot of folk in this room. When I first got involved in HIV, I didn't know a case from a soup case or control from anything else. I just knew that I had a passion for black people, and black people were dying, and no one was actually having this conversation. And when I went to a couple of meetings and just stumbled upon information, I found out what the pandemic was doing, in fact, to black women. And being a husband and a father of 3 daughters, I wondered why is it that no one was having this discussion or this conversation around black women. I know that in the community, again, that sometimes we shy away from difficult conversations when we didn't necessarily want to talk about HIV, when they didn't want to talk about homosexuality, they didn't want to talk about IDU, they didn't want to talk about any of the difficult things that we need to talk about, and we have to talk about if we're going to rescue our people. Unfortunately, I live in Inglewood, so my house notes are reasonable, and I can say what I want to say. So we've been extremely fortunate in that regard, and I hope we can share some information.
Okay, let's see. Hello? Hello? Better. Okay. I'll just hold it. My name is Christopher Hucks-Ortiz, and I kind of am someone who straddles the world of both community and research. I've been working in the field of public health research, I want to say since, well, it's been almost 20 years. I started when I was 5. I've been blessed to work, as Tony mentioned, I've been blessed to work with a lot of the folks in this room. One of the things that I'm currently involved with, Brother Karn mentioned the way that MBGMAC and the Black Gay Research Group generated a response to the NIH around the proliferation of black male researchers for the HPTN 061 protocol. And my position as a project director here in Los Angeles is a direct result of their efforts. And so I want to, number one, say thank you to MBGMAC and the BGRG for that. And it gives me an opportunity to really speak to the importance of doing the work in and of a community that at the end of the day I go home to as well. So that's what I'm here to share about today.
Okay, excellent. So part of this, let's frame it a little bit. So part of this discussion is about really beginning to engage in a more critical dialogue with respect to addressing some of the structural issues, some of the structural barriers that relate to community agencies, right? So for example, what are some of the challenges in research and or conducting one's sense of research with respect to programs? So there was some discussion early on homegrown programs, homegrown interventions. Dr. Marlon Bailey talked about interventions in terms of some of that discussion, but also examining some of the complexities of this work. So for example, what are the relationships like? Who are the players? Investigators who are members of the community versus outsiders. So this whole debate in terms of insiders versus outsiders. So there's lots of interesting and very, very rich issues to tackle, but inherent as part of some of these issues, there are some complexities and there are some tensions. So hopefully we could work through some of the tensions that arise too, in terms of some of this work, in terms of community-based participatory research. So the first question I would like to pose is, what is community-based participatory research from your perspective?
When I think of community-based participatory research, and for, you know, in public health, we love using acronyms, so I'll just say CBPR. When I think of doing this sort of work, sure, okay. Ideally, what we're talking about community and research, so these should ideally be partnerships that fundamentally involve both people who are more traditionally trained, so someone who can speak to say, for example, research methods. And I like, Mary, the way that you mentioned how you can sort of communicate as a liaison between these two worlds, because you would need someone ideally who can speak to the researchers in research language, but who can be of and from the community, so that what the researchers are getting is a full and equal partner from jump. So from the very beginning of the design of whatever this is or isn't, and what someone who's speaking for what the community feels like they need, I would say.
Too often, to me, is once you get a grant, you come in the community and you try to tell me how to do what you know you can't do, and you don't include us on the front end. You don't include us on the front end, but then you want us to make it happen on the back end. And too often you go to the same folk and you get the same results, and nothing changes. I think that's the most difficult part. We're never included on the front end when you talk about how you're going to do what you want to do. You get it, then you come and say, this is what we got to do. Now, we don't have no money to do this. We don't have no money to do this. We can only do this. We can do this. We can't feed nobody, so we got to pretend that we bought some pencils, and we got to do all this foolishness. And then on the back end, I mean, that's just the sad reality of it. And too often, if it would be Dr. Wyatt or John, I mean, you guys are hamstringing what you can and you cannot do, and then they ask you to do a miracle, and then when you do, that's if you get it. And then too often, more often than not, they'll give it to someone that doesn't look like me, and they'll subcontract you and pretend that they were doing something for me. That's tough. But again, we don't really have these conversations on the front end. That's what it is to me. It's you come in to me with a problem that I got to solve.
Yeah, and I would say, so the ideal in my mind is community-based participatory research is what I have with a few people in this room, where we know that there's a grant opportunity, and then we start talking about what the needs of the clients of my organization are and how those mesh with the research interests of the individuals, who can write the grants and go after the money. So that's the ideal, and I think what Tony said is absolutely what happens a lot of the time, which is not the ideal. So I think the goal of a meeting like this is to set up those connections in advance so that when there's an opportunity to apply for funding to do research, there are some strong community partners who can say, and this is what we need. And what I also have are some wonderful research partners who do say, well, let's do what needs to be done. It's not really about my research agenda. It should be more about what the needs of the community are.
Can I add one more thing? I think it's also important that we understand that, being realistic, we know, if we're just going to be honest, we know that folk going to go to who they go to. They always do that. But I think we need to figure out a way that they broaden it in terms of, I'm not asking nobody to stop giving to who they've been given to, because that would be very difficult to change that rhythm. But we need to honestly come up with a system where, or create a dialogue where folk understand that you need to bring in some other folk, because certainly it ain't worked this long with the guy you've been using. Let me fail a little while. You know what I mean? Those are legitimate questions that we need to raise. And it's almost insulting. I don't mean to put David on blast, but I was hearing, I heard that it was a grant in dealing with black men, whatever, sex with other men or something, and they gave it to a white guy in some place. Just if I'm halfway close. Which was, no, I'm just saying, because but it seems crazy, and it seems even crazier that we weren't up in arms and didn't raise hell about that. That's crazy to me. That makes absolutely no sense to me. It's like when I went to a meeting one time, and the guy was telling me how, as a black man, I should relate to black women around HIV. And it was a gay white man. Was that insane or what? Maybe it's me. It's just crazy how we do that kind of stuff. And nobody, we sit and we just kind of listen to it, and then we talk about it when we get lunch or break or the coffee thing. And I think that's ridiculous, and I think it's sad. And that's what's killing us.
What about some other tensions? People are beginning to talk about some of their experiences in terms of researchers, in terms of inside or outside. But are there other tensions that kind of need to be worked and kind of put on the table? So if we're truly talking about doing community-based participatory research, right, and when we think about that, some of the earlier folks who were up here talked about the importance of engaging communities, going back to the communities, really engaging a partnership, going back and actually presenting what you found, right, in collaboration with some of the communities that help set you up, right? So are there other tensions that are embedded within the context of community-based participatory research that kind of needs to be fleshed out, some of these tensions?
I'm not sure if it's where you're going, but I do think about the fact that we have as an organization our programs that we need to have funded and that we want to keep running, and that it seems like the best way to fund them is yet another research grant. And so our organization's activities are being driven by what is the research grant that we can write for. And so that it somewhat devalues the fact that we, on some level, think we know what we're doing and know how to serve the people who we want to serve, that every time we need to repackage it as, this is for this group of people. And a lot of times our staff says, even just in terms of HIV, there are all these services for people who are HIV positive in Los Angeles. What about the prisoners who are coming out who have, in effect, the same set of challenges that someone living with HIV has, and yet they don't have access to the funds for housing, transportation. So I think it's a bigger problem in terms of nonprofit administration and society. But we have to be grant driven. And this